Welcome to PowerUp podcast, the podcast that seeks to empower and dismantle, giving us the power and confidence to question, deconstruct, rebuild, and expand in life. I'm your host, Amma Rouge, voiceover and multidisciplinary artist, well-being advocate, food and book geek with over 14 years of movement-centered experience.
I am your host, Mesma, artist, choreographer, yogi and coach with a passion for alchemy, creativity, transformation and workplace wellness.
We recognise that we can't dismantle and empower or be empowered without first learning ourselves, diving deeper to unlearn the harmful, restrictive and unprogressive. It's an ongoing practice and journey for us all, which is why we created this podcast.
Our show features guests doing the work to enlighten, deconstruct and power up in their own magical ways.
We're going to be having conversations around the power of healing, transformation, well-being and creativity, and how they feed our personal and collective evolution, how they help us power up. Today we are joined by Martha Cuffy, her pronouns are she, her, who, when I read her bio, I was having one of my hyperventilation, joyful, geeky moments, and you're going to find out very soon why. Martha is a wellness architect and leadership coach with a curiosity about how we walk with aliveness and how the body facilitates that. This has been a source of lifelong fascination for her. Martha has lived in an ashram university for 2 years, studying for an MA in yoga psychology and other wellness experiences, like wild swimming in Wales in November, and we're going to speak about wild swimming a little later in today's episode, or designing primal spa experiences in a rainforest garden in Dominica. I mean, we need to get into this big time. And Martha suggests that maybe this is all an antidote to MBA studies, working in tech and corporate finance before making the switch. The so-called lockdown was a time for Martha to go within again, like she did in India. And she was fortunate to have the tools. So in her words, this time it was not so crazy making. Martha is part of a global group exploring somatic abolitionism and is grateful to have great souls like Corinne Bell, Amber McZill and Resma Menachem, who's the author of My Grandmother's Hands, as the facilitators for her year-long journey. Martha's passions are supporting Black leaders in so many different settings, from Windsor Castle, went there when I was 7, to online forums to help them gain board positions. Martha was born and raised in East London, Newham, and she's lived in France, Germany, India, and Dominica. Welcome, Martha, to the show.
Thank you, Ella and Amma, for having me.
Absolute beast! Like, if I could just teleport and live in someone's body for a little bit, I'm like, Martha Cuffy.
Right. So many questions, so many things I want to dive into just on a personal, like, yeah, but can you just explain about this? But wait, can you just explain about this?
Exactly how I feel. I think we should maybe start with finding a little bit more out about your journey, Martha. You seem to have already lived such a full life on, many different levels, full of so many different experiences and choices in terms of where you spend your time, how you spend your energy and resource. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey, please?
Well, I suppose I would say that I had a lot of curiosity as a child, and my parents knew that. My school knew it, and in the context of when you're young, it gets channeled into O levels and A levels, right? I also knew that my life was beyond what I saw was happening in the East End, and I didn't imagine myself going to work at 16. So I carried on studying, and then my teachers encouraged me to go study. So I did that too. So some parts of my journey were not typical for somebody being brought up in Plaistow, but typical for people from other areas. And then you do something which is out of the ordinary for your upbringing, and then you actually realise, is that what I wanted to do? But it gives you an opening into different worlds. So for me, it was always about, I studied languages because that would enable me to travel and see more of the world. So it wasn't that I had a clear direction. about what I wanted to do. It was simply, what could I do that would keep on opening doors for me, like the gates of Shaolin, if you've ever watched that film.
Love it. Can we ask what languages you speak? Just because I'm a language geek, so that's really exciting for me.
Well, like
Yes.
my A levels were French, German, and Latin. And then when I lived
Amazing.
in Germany, I tried to learn a bit of Spanish, which didn't really work too well because I knew some Italian from the Latin. So I kept on corrupting it. So I sort of dropped that. I learned to read Devanagari, which is Sanskrit. So I could chant
Wow.
when I lived in India. So it wasn't that I could
Wow.
write it, but I could read it from the
Yeah.
scripts to chant.
And then what happened next? I'm like on the edge of my seat, excited about your journey.
Well, the thing was, I graduated in 91 from Bristol University, and it was a really crap time to find a job. I worked for BT for a couple of years, and I just wasn't, doing anything. So I left and went traveling in the Caribbean for a few months. And for that time, that awoken to me the sensibility towards nature and how we make things complex. So I remember one time being at a river with a friend, and I was saying, "Oh, I wish there was a chemist nearby because I need a pumice stone." And they just picked up a stone and handed it to me. And that was such a like a
Wow.
knock in the head
Yeah.
moment, of like how everything is curated or, wrapped up and called organic
Mm,
when it's just there and available. But when you live in urban environments, it has to go through so many layers and processes that you don't
yeah.
appreciate how directly available that thing can be
Mm,
if you live in the right environment.
Beautiful.
yes. So, so true.
Beautiful.
It reminds me of such a small anecdotal memory that's just come to mind that I hope you don't mind me sharing. It's a little bit sideways, but it resonates with what you just said. My best friend, when I was younger, I used to stay at her house on weekends, and her mum used to brush her teeth with something called chewing stick, which there's probably a Ghanaian word for it. But the English translation is chewing stick. And you literally pull off like a bunch of it, and it's a type of stick, a type of branch, but it's a really pliable, and it's all kind of meshed together, and you pull a chunk out and you put it in your mouth and you chew it, and you chew it over time, and it cleans your teeth and cleans your mouth. And when we were super young, first we were like, ew, what's that thing? And we were like, got our toothbrushes, and we were like, this is how we clean our teeth. And then as we got to kind of early teens, we became curious about it, and we both were like, oh, we want to try chewing stick, because it became this cool thing that we were, looking up to her mum for using, that was from our heritage country, that rather than it being this, I guess, like strange archaic way of brushing your teeth, it was like, oh my God, this thing works. And then we started to use it and wanted to use it. But it just reminds me of what you said, that kind of um, relationship to nature, and how when it's actually around you, and that chewing stick will be something that is probably just very readily available in the environment, and they grow up using. But for us, we were using these plastic toothbrushes that have been put together and manufactured and made, and we have to go to the shop and buy them. And she was like, I might have moved country, but I'm still using my chewing stick. And it's just so much more direct and so much quicker as well. None of that faff, and so yeah, it just reminds me of that. How your mind, there's a change in your mindset, or a switching and opening, that happens if you haven't been born into that environment.
Mm,
I think the bigger issue as well is that you devalue those things from that environment
Yes,
until it's repackaged in this Western way, you see.
absolutely.
yeah.
Yep, agree. You see it
Yeah.
all the time. You
Yeah.
see it all the time with, oil pulling, coconut oil and how it's packaged, charcoal, you constantly turmeric.
And then it's so expensive as well, isn't it? When it's actually just the natural thing, like now you can get the turmeric to make the drink, which is actually just still turmeric, but it's just in a different
Yeah.
package, so it's more expensive. Can you just tell us a little bit about your studying in an ashram university? Because wow.
Yeah, that came about because I was working in corporate finance, knew that wasn't it, and occasionally I would go and spend time in Wiltshire and attend these workshops. And at one of these workshops, a woman leading it said to me, you need to go do this course in India. And I was like, what? And she said, And then like I was due to go back to London that day, and she sent a message saying, no, stay overnight at the retreat. And so I did. And then I had a dream that I would actually sell my flat in Maida Vale and do this course.
Wow.
And then I went back to London with this thought, and then I kind of went, okay, so certain things had to happen, and they all did. And I ended up, you know, and 4 days before going, I also took all my mercury fillings out because I sold the flat, had some extra cash. So I was doing all
Amazing.
these intense things just before going. And then when I got there, I saw crotons, which you'd find in the Caribbean and in Dominica. So instantly I felt this connection from the tropics, you know, of the Caribbean to the tropics of India.
Can you just explain what crotons are?
They're like these whirly plants that are kind of green and red. Yeah, called crotons. And they grew in the grounds of the ashram. And and then we were in a routine. It was very regimented. You know, you'd get up around 4 o'clock in the morning because the classes started at 5 a.m. You were expected to work in the kitchens, work in the gardens, as well as formal study for your masters. So there was this real mix of things. So one minute you could be scrubbing toilets, and then next minute you're kind of studying and working in the library. And then you'd always have to do garden duty, like every day of the week, I think 6 or 7 days of the week. There was kirtan every evening, which was chanting and singing. That was really beautiful, actually, because you could come in a foul mood, and then at the end of the chanting, you'd be somewhere else. And there was also a special formation on which the ashram was. There was the mineral formation and the rocks, which meant that you had these intense dreams, and it was also in a curve in the Ganges, the whole area in that region. So you would just have these more intense dreams. And I was fortunate to work with a parapsychologist who now lives in Glastonbury, and she came over. Actually, she spent 2 years there, and so we did studies around what is it that is happening. You know, if you are a swami who's been there for years, or a student, what is happening to your perception? Is it that you're really tuned in, or what is that dynamic? And she had worked with somebody at Edinburgh University to create an experiment to look at what is going on. Can you predict what the target film is, which is randomly chosen by the computer? So there were 100 clips. You'd get 4, and then we would do a meditation whilst the computer was selecting a clip. And then you would share the images or senses that would come up from your Ajapa meditation, and then you'd have to pick which is a target film clip.
Amazing. I just want to ask millions.
Wow.
I've just got 2 questions about this, and then I promise I'll stop. Okay, so question number 1, what kind of yoga was this?
This was the Bihar School of Yoga, so Satchidananda Yoga. Yeah, they used to be. I mean, there's many more yoga books now, but they still do one that's very popular, Asana Pranayam Mudra Bandha APMB, which is a really sort of dense book that kind of has a compendium of all the key poses.
I'm really curious to know, Martha, at this stage in your journey, were you, because I know you said that, you know, the woman on the retreat said to you that this is what's going to happen. I think you should do this course. So at this stage in your journey, were you quite open to everything that was happening and kind of in a space of openness and acceptance and curiosity?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't really say that. I was in this space where I knew something had to happen, and I didn't know how it was going to happen. So this is a great example of, you know, something needs to happen, but you can't control what it looks like.
Yeah.
So you just keep on stepping forward and saying, okay, I'll keep on doing these workshops. I was also a trustee of the Iyengar Yoga Institute at the time. So I kept on doing things that were not, which I knew were not kind of the norm in terms of, you know, working in corporate finance in the city. And just in the hope that there would be a breakthrough, really.
Yeah. So that really speaks to the idea of just putting one foot in front of the other, taking that first step.
Yeah. And just keep on following your interests and just trusting.
I love that. You said something at the beginning, actually, to that effect, something around this openness, like you kept making choices that would allow you to continue to be open and continue to be curious. I'm paraphrasing, but
Yeah.
I just think that's so delicious. And it's something that I think we need to hear more and more, because I think a lot of us grow up in such a rigid society with such linear ideas about what's going to happen, what our journey should unfold, like what we should be doing. To hear someone who is where you are in terms of your life experiences, in terms of what you're doing with your energy, resource, time, what you've achieved, so refreshing to actually hear the opposite of that.
I think part of the problem is that we've been socialized to believe that everything comes from our solo efforts. So if I can't imagine it, then it won't happen.
Yes.
This whole thing about the solo Marlborough man image, and not that we're all deeply interconnected and that we're shut off from so many opportunities and openings because we get busy with our head and say, oh God, how am I going to make this happen? Instead of looking up and seeing an old school friend and saying, hi, how are you doing? And then they mention something that opens up another door.
Right, that is so true. I'm reading The Heroine's Journey at the moment, and it's just such it's kind of blowing my mind of thinking about life in this very different way, instead of the kind of the solo journey, but this kind of collective community, and almost this unlearning of the conditioning that society brings us, even around the ideas of what success is, and how we kind of live and inhabit our body in a place of love, rather than that kind of like, well, now I've got to do this, and this is the next thing on my to-do list, so that's what comes next.
Yeah, and you can see in your body language, Ella, it's changing, and the hands getting rigid, and the face is forming a certain expression, and it's taking you away from essence, right, of who you are. And that's what people do all the time. They do it in corporate environments, and because some people say to me, how do you work with people in corporate, like with leadership coaching and stuff? And I say, well, you start where they are, but there's always some little opening. And I welcome the skepticism, because sometimes people look at me, go, what is that you've just said? And they may not understand straight away. But so for me, I like to take on the challenge of how can I explain this in a way where they can get an experience for themselves. And then when they next go into a meeting, they show up differently.
And the ripples that will create as well for other people, of being given permission to be more themselves, that's the magic. Okay, my last question before the next question is just about TRE. Like, how did you meet TRE? How did TRE come into your life?
Well, that came because I had a really bad problem with a tooth, and I had to get it extracted. And then I went for some cranio work to help me with that. And then the person who gave me the cranio is also a TRE trainer. And that's how it opened up. And then I went to a workshop, and then I was like, oh, yeah, actually. And then I also realized I'd been doing a lot of breath work, connected breath work. And I could see that my psoas muscle was really tight, my diaphragm. And so I'd been doing some chi sang on that and whatever, but actually that can be a real hard way in to soften that area. And something like TRE is a way to connect, because you're releasing over time all the tension that you hold in those places, rather than trying to knead them out, So like massage therapists burn out their hands because they're trying to knead out all this tension that's been locked in a person's body for decades,
For our listener, just to explain, TRE stands for Trauma Release Exercise, and is a wonderful sequence. In fact, Martha, if you want to describe it, because you are.
Yeah. So what I say to people is that, every mammal, whether it's a cat, dog, human being, we are born with this innate ability to shake off stress. And cats and dogs continue to do it unafraid, unimpeded. But humans, when they get to a certain age, they kind of go, oh, I can't show that I'm afraid, or this is a dodgy situation. And we just, we literally use the thing, brace yourself. So we just keep on bracing and accumulating all this tension and energy. And then it shows up in funky behavior. Then we have children and pass it down to our kids. And so people have all this funky behavior, don't understand where it comes from. And it just causes all kinds of chaos in our body, whether it's with our thyroid, our all sorts of things, migraines, or it can show up in a myriad of ways depending on our kind of journey in life and biology. And so it's just reconnecting us back to a natural mechanism that we already have. And because it's simple, people kind of go, what? And then the mind gets suspicious because we've been told the mind is in control. So that's a big part of the journey initially, is making friends with our mind and the process. So the mind can say, oh, it's okay. It's the wisdom of the body doing its thing. It knows what it's doing. It can continue.
I have a question, Martha, which is about somatic abolitionism and how this ties into your work as a wellness architect.
Yeah, I suppose everything has context and timing. So in 2020, we had, different places around the world really being constrained about how we could move. Then you had the murder of George Floyd that happened around the same time. And then somebody pinged me a message to say, oh, this course is going on, this experience, this journey. I wouldn't even call it a course, actually.
Wow.
It was like a global gathering of people, about 700 people, inspired by the work of Resma Menakem, which is my grandmother's hands. And it was really looking at how do we, on a sort of philosophical level, it's about how do we repair the flow of love? Because right now we've got many, we've designed systems, or not me personally, we help perpetuate systems where love and resources go to places based on the color of your skin and not on your innate value as a human being.
Yes.
So this was what it was looking at, what's the reality of having a darker hued skin, a white skin? How does that show up in how we interact with each other? And taking the practices out of somebody's books and exploring that in our lives and in these groups that we would have monthly and in these smaller groups that we'd have.
Beautiful.
To see what would come up for each other. And of course, it does inform my work because I've worked with people who have experienced things, both as being Black people, Black professionals, but also with working with people who are mixed groups, and they're trying to navigate these conversations around race because many organizations were committed to having these conversations. So I'm not about helping people write charters or anything like that. This is about the human experience of relating and what shows up. And why is it that you can't have a conversation? Because basically you're all bringing in so much unconscious charge around this topic, what you've inherited, things you're aware of, what you aren't aware of, that make it really difficult to stay present. And also realizing what we internalize that isn't true. And so there's like a forgiveness that has to go on. God, why did I believe this about myself? Because maybe you were the only Black child in a group or whatever, and then you just took on stuff, or you did stuff so that you could survive. Like that goes back to TRE. We do things to survive because our nervous system needs to feel safe, and so we don't want to be rejected from whatever group that we're part of. So what do? We may fawn, we may fight, or we may flee, but we do all these different things to adapt and survive. And then there gets to an age where you start to resist that a bit and go, oh God, I can't do this anymore. And maybe it's because you're not sleeping very well. You see the cost of it on yourself. You see the cost on your health. Some people go, oh, I'll just do this job for 5 years, even though it's in a really toxic environment, because it'll get my kids through school. It'll help pay the mortgage. So there's some real practical life choices that are linked to all of this. But I say to people, what is the cost to you? You keep on leaving yourself out of the equation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And often things will implode at a really inconvenient time.
And it feels like it's very connected to this, like almost like getting the image of like a kettle boiling, of like we push ourselves and we push ourselves until actually we just can't live under those extreme situations anymore, or that pressure that we put on ourselves to kind of just suffer and get on with it, when actually our bodies are craving to express themselves and to flow with love, like you said. And I think this coming back constantly to, well, how do I fill up my cup? How do I look after my own well-being? Because actually the ripples that I'm going to create are so different when I'm stressed versus when I'm in that state of relaxed and my nervous system is healthy and well.
It's interesting you use the image of a cup, Ella, because the cup is already filled with so much stress that people aren't aware of. So when they wake up in the morning, it's probably 75% full. Then you look at your phone, you get a message, oh, this has been cancelled, or da-da-da-da. So you don't have any space or capacity to respond and create.
Right.
And so that's what people aren't really. So to make people aware of, look, this is what you're holding in your body. That means your cup is really full already. Let's be honest. And so, but it's a journey to be aware about what are the signals in your body that shows you that your cup is 75% full.
And actually, often people are so accustomed to those signals being there that they don't actually see them. And it takes someone else like yourself to come in and kind of bring them back to this place of kind of neutrality, to actually be able to start to recognize, oh, wow, that means that's been going on and this has been going on. And I think to go back to what you were saying about the image of the kettle kind of boiling over, there's also the other way that it can manifest, in the sense that the person just becomes so worn out, they become so drained, they become so exhausted, but from leaving themselves out of the equation, that actually they just can't leave themselves out anymore, because there's no way for them to move further forward. You know, it becomes something that they have to address.
Well, I think there's also socialization, which means particularly for women, which says that I'm not allowed to say I need some time off unless I get so sick that I require a doctor's certificate, some sort of external validation of my state.
Yeah. And so we're talking about the nervous system and how it's impacted, and then how we start to recognize the state we're in, or how our nervous system has been activated. Can you tell us a little bit about all of the open water swimming you've been doing?
I think there's many things which we can approach that we can approach with a real strong mind, and this really brings you back much more into the body and humility, open water swimming. I did it in November with some friends. We were in Wales, and we just decided, it was a lovely sunny morning. We were there at the bay in West Wales, and so we kind of went in, and without too much of an awareness of what are the pluses and minuses of, you know, swimming in the sea in November. And then I live in East London, so a friend said, let's go and do this induction to open water swimming in the Victoria Docks, so very close to where I was brought up, less than a mile from where my parents live now. And so in that, you get to see, the nervous system needs to be primed, it needs to be prepared, and the body always needs to feel safe. And so that's why you can go into a big state of shock, because you're going into these really cold temperatures, which the body isn't used to. And there's a whole range of physiological things that happen in terms of your blood flow, what happens to your perception, that you really have to be mindful of. So it's a real education of, okay, what is happening in my body? It's a real crash course in sensation awareness. And so the first couple of minutes are really intense, as you're getting all this feedback and signals from the body as what's going on. Like my arms were tingling. I had this intense sensation around my neck, and it's like, oh, what's happening? And you're trying to compute all these things, and what is kind of okay, and what is, you know, alarm bell territory. And luckily we had a fantastic instructor who kind of guided us around what to look out for. And one of the things you can do when you're out swimming, if you've been out too long, is ask your friend, what's their name? Can they spell it backwards?
Amazing.
You know, like signals like that.
Of course, I had to do that in my head quickly.
Me too. And I was like, I need to choose a longer name.
Oh, you've got a great name.
Easy.
You've got a great name for smelling backwards.
Yeah, but even that actually you won't be able to do if your brain centers have started to shut down and your body's gone into this other mode. You see, it seems really easy right now, but when your body is in this like super activated state, it won't be able to do it. It won't be able to do it. And so so through the open water swimming, there's a quality of aliveness, which is why I think people go to extreme sports, because they're in a place where they've stopped being able to feel. And so you go for these extreme things to do that are actually, you know, can be life harming. You know, open water swimming, if you ignore the signals, people can come a cropper. And, you know, the instructor explained to us that people who have, like, one person got hypothermia, and that person admitted they did because they ignored the signals. Their mind had fixated on, I'm going to swim for 45 minutes, when the body was clearly giving signals earlier of, you need to get back to shore.
Gosh.
So it's a great training around what are the signals that we're ignoring in our life until they get really hard and they start pounding on us, so that we start to pay attention.
Yeah.
So powerful.
It sounds like it's being in the body and listening to the body first over the mind, right?
Yeah. And also assessing how you assess risk. I think there's been so much in the past 2 years about risk assessment, which we have not been taught. And
Yeah.
people have just been put in this heightened state of fear without saying, actually, what are the risks of me doing this or being here, or, you know, my health status? And people haven't been helped to assess that. And so, you know, when I look at open water swimming, there's a real grounded way of how do I, you know, take these small steps to start that process of open water swimming. There's a clear trajectory, steps, things you have to be aware of, what you can do. And I know that certainly my experience was different. So there were 3 of us there yesterday morning, somebody who's never been in cold water before, but she had a soft wetsuit on, a friend who's done it before, but not at this site, and me who's done it before, but not at that site, but she's done it far more than me, my friend. And the person who'd never done it before, she's the one that stayed in the shortest amount of time, because I think her body's never been used to that level of cold. So there's a real shock element. But there's also, I think, you know, I'm a TRE practitioner. I've done yoga for many years. That gives you access to a part of your ability to stay calm and stay connected to your breath in a way where others would more kind of flip into another state.
Panic or
fight or flight.
Because I wasn't in panic. I was just like going down slowly. I was great. I was fortunate because I was given gloves and sort of socks to be like these neoprene socks to put on, and I could just go down step by step because I had literal steps from the ladder. So it's easier. It's literal, like, you know, there's a gradation that supports you to go. Even though you're going, wow, this is cold, but you can do it because you're just like, oh, step by step. It's not a dive in. That's an extreme kind of shock way to going, which I wouldn't recommend at all. For especially those separate.
I had an experience like that as a child, and you know, it's taken me years to train going into cold water because of that experience was so shocking.
So that's the thing about TRE is about, you know, to get people to notice, is this too quick, too fast, too much? And then to titrate, you know, to pause and to go to a sensation that is pleasurable. So we've created a mindset in society about push, and if you don't push, then you won't achieve. And it's like, no, actually, there are gentler ways of embarking on great journeys, and it starts with the first step.
Thank you for listening. You can connect to us and our guests via the links in each episode's show notes. Before you go, we invite you to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the goodness to come. And if you enjoyed today, perhaps tell a friend to tell a friend. We are always grateful for you, our listeners, for our fabulous guests, and to everyone who has contributed to and been a part of our journey here.
Our music is by Tomo Carter. Everything else is brought to you by us, the PowerUp Power Team.
I'm Mesma.
I am Ama Rouge. And we are PowerUp Podcast.